All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a narrative of absolute epic proportions drawn directly from creationist research and genetic modeling. We are literally plunging headfirst into the microscopic lattice of the human cell to uncover the story of an ancient, flawless genetic masterwork that is slowly, irreversibly unwinding under the relentless pressure of a fallen world. Imagine a biological fortress. It was originally designed for absolute perfection, but now it's facing an encroaching darkness that its own internal machinery is desperately trying to fight off. So we're going to explore the theory of genetic entropy, the mathematical decay of human lifespans, and the ticking clock of our very DNA. Let's dive in.
969. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is the recorded age of the biblical patriarch Methuselah, and for a lot of people, that number is just a poetic myth. No way someone lives that long, right? But according to the creationist researchers and the genetic models we're reviewing today, this number is absolutely not an exaggeration. Instead, they argue it's actually a mathematical reflection of a vanished biological vitality. It's a remnant of a time when the human machine was operating at its absolute, uncorrupted peak. These sources frame the original human genome as a literal masterpiece of biological architecture. Think of it kind of like an ultimate form in an anime, a code of staggering precision etched in the foundational language of biology. Before the catastrophic breach of sin and the environmental collapse described in Genesis, researchers proposed that our genome was built for permanence. We're talking about a world of immense, unbelievable robustness, where the machinery of life moved with the shimmering fidelity of a system designed to endure indefinitely, completely free of the progressive decay we see everywhere today.
And our ultimate defense mechanism against that decay? It's called the mRNA complex. It's this incredibly complex chemomechanical molecular machine made up of 3 specific proteins: MRE11, RAD50, and NBS1. You can think of this intricate repair crew, which, by the way, is conserved across all domains of life, as our personal microscopic guardians. They constantly patrol our DNA, acting as a high-fidelity sensor to detect damage, signal alarms, and basically scaffold the DNA spiral for immediate repair. It is a tireless guardian fighting day and night to hold the fortress together.
But here's the terrifying part. That guardian is fighting a massive, overwhelming battle. Every single day, in every single warm-blooded mammalian cell in your body, the DNA fortress faces a staggering 10,000 lesions. 10,000. That's 10,000 individual instances of damage that the mRNA complex must desperately sense and repair, just to prevent permanent mutations from taking root. It is a relentless 24/7 siege on the code of life.
All of this compounding damage leads us straight to the concept of genetic entropy. This hypothesis, championed by geneticist Dr. John Sanford, suggests our genome is slowly being overwritten by what is essentially a digital virus of mutations. These mutations are what scientists call near neutral, meaning their negative effects are so incredibly tiny that natural selection simply cannot detect them to weed them out. Because of this, they just silently accumulate in the background, building up generation after generation. So what's causing this? Well, our genetic code is constantly bombarded by genotoxic stress. Whether it's from basic oxygen metabolism, environmental toxins like industrial dioxins, or ionizing radiation, the damage is compounding. Because of this unrelenting pressure, roughly 100 new, totally irreversible mutations are added to the human gene pool with every single generation. Think about that. We are essentially handing down a slightly more degraded, glitchy genetic library every single time we reproduce.
Okay, so let's hit rewind for a second. If we're accumulating mutations right now, going backward in time means we would find fewer and fewer copying errors in the sequence, right? Creationist sources suggest that in the pre-flood world, humanity operated with virtually zero genetic load. This pristine genetic state, combined with a highly protected, shielded environment, allowed these early humans, these vanishing giants, to resist decay for nearly a millennium.
When we actually examine the historical records, the Genesis accounts of extreme longevity, Adam at 930, Methuselah heading 969, and Noah at 950, are remarkably mirrored by extra-biblical texts. Now, while documents like the Sumerian king list definitely use exaggerated epochs, researchers argue that it points to a shared historical memory across completely different ancient cultures, a memory of a pre-flood golden age where lifespans were unimaginably long, far, far above the biological ceilings we know today.
The contrast between the pristine pre-flood world and the biologically hostile post-flood Earth is absolutely stark. You have the early world characterized by perfect DNA and minimal genetic load, perhaps even shielded by a different atmospheric canopy. But following the deluge, Researchers point to severe genetic bottlenecks, reducing the population down to just a few individuals, extreme environmental shifts like the onset of an ice age, and intense cosmic radiation. All of these acted as massive catalysts for the rapid, unstoppable accumulation of harmful mutations.
The exponential death spiral, the mathematical precision of post-flood genetic collapse.
Now, the core evidence for this entire theory lies in the math. When you plot the lifespans from Noah down to Moses, it forms an exact, predictable mathematical exponential decay curve. This is the exact same natural decay rate we see when living organisms are exposed to toxic substances or massive radiation. Researchers strongly argue that ancient writers couldn't have possibly fabricated such a precise mathematical downward curve. They just recorded what they saw.
Following the timeline, you can literally watch the tragedy unfold generation by generation. Noah, acting as the baseline, hits 950 years, but then his son Shem drops dramatically to 600. By generation 5, Peleg is down to 239. Abraham drops to 175 and Joseph to just 110. Generation by generation, the human machine is rapidly losing its capacity to repair itself, with lifespans plummeting until they finally stabilize near the absolute limits we experience today.
Now you might be wondering, couldn't natural selection just fix this? To test that hypothesis, creationist researchers utilize highly advanced biological software models like Mendel's Accountant, and what they found is staggering. These numerical simulations demonstrate that even when factoring in strong natural selection, it simply cannot halt this progressive downward slide. The simulations show that bad mutations vastly outnumber good ones, accumulating in the human genome in a linear, completely unstoppable fashion over thousands of years.
And this brings us to the ultimate prophetic mystery of our analysis. Right before the flood, God issues a profound decree in Genesis 6:3, stating that man's days shall be 120 years. But what does this 120-year horizon actually mean for the ultimate fate of our ticking code?
Well, the linguistic mystery behind that decree hinges on a single Hebrew word, yadon. This term appears only once in the entire Old Testament, which leaves scholars deeply debating its exact translation. Does it mean God's Spirit will no longer strive or contend with man's rebellion, or does it mean His Spirit will no longer abide or remain in man to actually sustain those ancient 900-year lifespans?
This linguistic ambiguity is fascinating because it leads researchers to three distinctly epic interpretations. First, you have the grace countdown, a literal 120-year timer until the floodwaters actually hit, allowing a window of time for repentance. Second is the biological ceiling, a hard physical cap placed on human longevity moving forward. And third is the Jubilee prophecy, which is a macro-scale timeline essentially mapping out the entire future of humanity itself.
Let's look closer at the biological ceiling for a second. If this interpretation is correct, it represents the absolute limit of the human machine, once the genetic load became simply too heavy to bear. It was a progressive ceiling that was finally and perfectly realized centuries later when Moses, who, despite being reported in excellent physical health, died at exactly 120 years old.
Alternatively, some researchers examine the math from a prophetic standpoint. They view the 20 years as Jubilee cycles. In biblical terms, a Jubilee is exactly 50 years. So multiply 120 by 50 and you get 6,000 years. This is interpreted by some models as a literal countdown for the entire lease of human history on a fallen Earth. It's a staggering concept when you put the math together.
Ultimately, whether bounded by the mathematical reality of genetic entropy or a divine biological decree, the unwinding of the code definitely took its toll. Humanity eventually settled into the brief 70 to 80-year window that Moses lamented in Psalm 90. He wrote so profoundly of our frailty, stating, "Our days are 70, or 80 by reason of strength, ending in labor and sorrow." It is a striking reality that, even today, despite all of our incredible modern medicine, remains largely unchanged.
Which leaves us here with one final major question. As our mRNA complex fights a valiant but ultimately losing battle against time, mutations, and environmental toxins, as our genetic load continues to grow heavier with each passing generation, what really is the ultimate destiny of the human code? Is this original masterpiece destined to just unwind completely into the dark? Or is this ticking genetic clock actually pointing toward a final ultimate restoration? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.